Welcome back, investors and fellow macro watchers, to today's explainer. Let's just jump right into it. We're looking at a massive shift today, how China's tech ecosystem is totally rewiring global capital allocation. Honestly, we have to move way past the old, outdated narratives. We're looking straight at the hard data that's driving the markets of tomorrow. So to help you price in these supply chain and market risks, this explainer is broken down into 5 parts: mapping tech dominance, the state box strategy, market access risks, innovation by sanction, and finally, the global capital response. All right, let's get into it. Section 1. Mapping global tech dominance, beyond low-cost manufacturing. Now, the sheer scale of supply chain dominance here is just undeniable. If you're allocating capital anywhere near renewables, this is your baseline. China basically controls an estimated 80 to 95% of the global solar panel supply chain. Think about that. By 2028, forecasts are saying 60% of the entire world's renewable energy will be generated right there. That's a massive, absolute necessity for any macro energy model. And this grip, it completely bleeds into advanced commercial tech too. 70%. That's the staggering global market share held by just one Chinese company, DJI, for all the drones currently buzzing around in the sky. Actually, 3 of the top 10 drone makers worldwide are Chinese. It's essentially a near monopoly in a seriously high-growth sector. But it's not just hardware. Sure, we see EV companies like BYD overtaking legacy automakers, but they're also pushing hard on the absolute bleeding edge. Chinese AI firms are now issuing more patents globally than any other country, period. They're churning out the most quantum computing research, even edging past the US in certain developmental pockets. It's a total foundational shift in how we think about intellectual property generation. Moving on to Section 2, the state-backed funding strategy, the engine of growth. So let's trace exactly how we got here. Back in 2015, Beijing rolled out this massive Made in China 2025 initiative. The goal was pretty explicit: stop being the world's cheap factory and become a totally self-sufficient global tech powerhouse. By 2020, they had deployed over $627 billion, setting about 250 mini-goals across 10 tech sectors. Fast forward to today, based on analysis from the South China Morning Post, they've hit a staggering 86% of those benchmarks. In spaces like batteries and EVs, they actually blew right past the initial target. As investors, it is absolutely crucial to neutrally evaluate the specific tools driving this state-backed capitalism. We're talking massive capital deployment, like up to $1.5 trillion planned for grants and acquisitions. Then you have corporate mandates that force foreign joint ventures, plus huge incentives to pull top-tier researchers into domestic hubs. And of course, you have to factor in the geopolitical friction. You've got heavy allegations of IP theft from the US and its allies, accusations that China, we should note, firmly and consistently denies. It's just a very complex, multi-lever machine. Which brings us to Section 3, assessing market access risks, the regulatory threats. Now, with this kind of expansion comes some serious pushback. The US and its allies are increasingly citing national security and spying concerns. This makes massively successful platforms like TikTok incredibly vulnerable to sudden regulatory action. TikTok is the first non-US social network to dominate globally in a decade, and its whole user base is under a direct threat of intervention. If you're allocating capital to Chinese tech companies trying to scale in Western markets, this is a binary, high-stakes regulatory risk. And you're seeing the exact same dynamic play out with e-commerce challengers like Shein and Temu. All right, Section 4, innovation driven by sanctions, the self-sufficiency paradox. There's an old Chinese saying, life always finds its own way out. And honestly, that perfectly captures the dynamic we're seeing right now. All these huge external threats, the sanctions, the embargoes, they haven't crushed the sector. Instead, they've sort of awakened this forced, hyper-efficient drive for self-sufficiency. It's a total paradox. The restrictions have actually accelerated their domestic independence. Take Huawei, for example, as the ultimate case study here. Back in 2019, they were the undisputed global 5G leader. Then, they were absolutely crippled by US sanctions and chip restrictions over national security concerns. Their market share completely tanked. But then, jump to 2023. They completely shocked the market by dropping a new phone packed with an advanced, self-manufactured microchip. This was literally years ahead of what anyone in the West thought they were capable of. And we're seeing that exact same agile pivot with DeepSeek. This is a Chinese AI chatbot that totally caught the global market off guard. See, they couldn't get their hands on the top-tier chips to train their models because of the embargoes. So what did they do? They made do with older, restricted hardware and just invented entirely new, highly efficient training techniques. They built a world-class AI rivaling the US tech giants, but with way less kit and way less capital. For the global tech industry, it is a huge wake-up call about the long-term innovation that these supply restrictions can unintentionally spark. Which leads us to our final part, Section 5, the global capital response, West versus East. So, how is the rest of the world reacting aggressively? The US, along with industrial heavyweights like Germany and Japan, are fighting back hard. They're launching their own massive counterplans, injecting hundreds of billions into domestic funding just to hold on to their semiconductor lead. And we can definitely expect even more sanctions and export controls. This is the critical battleground right now. Because for all of China's 2025 advancements, they are still years behind when it comes to core leading-edge chipmaking. And the West is willing to pay a massive premium to make sure that gap stays wide. As macro investors, contrasting these massive capital deployments is basically your roadmap for the next decade. On one hand, you have the Chinese model, state-directed research pushing for absolute self-sufficiency, backed by an estimated $1.5 trillion in planned capital. On the other hand, you have the US strategy, which heavily relies on massive private sector investment. Just factor in the recent commitments from US tech giants pouring $500 billion into AI infrastructure. It really is a clash of two fundamentally different economic models, top-down state planning versus highly concentrated private capital. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a provocative thought to plug into your macro models. In a world of increasingly fractured, restricted supply chains, will forced self-sufficiency ultimately outpace global integration? That is absolutely the multi-trillion-dollar question for the next decade of tech investing. Thank you so much for joining me today. Keep analyzing those trends and, as always, keep questioning the data.